Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. As you can see, The Detective Is Already Dead won the poll for this month's review. This was one of those shows where I really had no idea what I was getting into before I started it. You could probably guess that this one was adapted from a light novel series. It's got one of those fairly long titles that spoils something kind of major about the series. But I really wasn't sure what kind of tone this story would have. Originally, I'd planned to have it on the October poll, actually, thinking it might be like a fun little ghost story. And it definitely wasn't that, so I'm glad it ended up being the September choice. The Detective Is Already Dead primarily follows a boy named Kimihiko Kimizuka. For as long as Kimi can remember, he's always had comically bad luck and been a magnet for trouble. For example, when we meet him, he's on a plane to some unknown destination, transporting a very suspicious briefcase because he accidentally wandered across some kind of shady gang meeting and was forced into becoming their errand boy. Mid-flight, a strange announcement is made. Much like they'd call for a doctor, the flight attendants want to know if there are any detectives on board, and go figure, the equally strange girl seated beside Kimi declares that she's a legendary detective, working under the codename Siesta. Before Kimi can process what's happening, Siesta pulls him along to the hostage situation taking place at the front of the plane, announcing that she's decided to make him her sidekick for this case. A case that quickly takes a wild, almost supernatural turn. This definitely isn't your regular old detective show, where the cases are mostly lighthearted misunderstandings or low-stakes crimes. But we'll come back to that. Just when Kimi thinks he's escaped the insanity and can go back to his usual unfortunate life, he arrives home to find Siesta already camped out in his apartment. She wants him to be her sidekick full-time, and she's not taking no for an answer. I really loved the dynamic between these two from the start. Siesta's very soft-spoken and serious, the kind of character who tends to bury her emotions, focusing on logic to solve her problems. But she can be a little immature, too. She's not above willfully misremembering things when Kimi's getting the upper hand in an argument, or when she's the one on the wrong end of the teasing. For his part, Kimi's the cynical but dutiful sidekick. He's not afraid to call her out on her bullshit when he knows she's lying or just trying to manipulate him, but he also trusts her judgment above all else when things get serious. There's a beauty in that kind of loyalty. He talks briefly about how, before Siesta, his life's ambitions were simply to outrun his bad luck one day and live as uneventful a life as possible. His exact description was the existential equivalent of bathing in lukewarm water, which might just be the most depressing thing I've ever heard. But of course, he does team up with her, and experiences the kind of excitement you can never really go back from. Their first case on the plane leads to a long battle against Spes, a terrorist organization trying to take over the world using superpowered androids. Kimi and Siesta spend 3 years together on this mission. They come to trust each other more than they trust themselves, and their partnership definitely morphs into something a little more romantic. But, as you know, the detective is already dead. Episode 2 picks up the story about a year after the tragedy, and Kimi's not coping particularly well. He's got the uneventful life he once dreamed of now, but of course it's not what he wants anymore. He's woken from his depression by a girl named Nagisa Natsunagi, who wants to hire him as a detective on her case. Nagisa is looking for someone, but she doesn't know who that someone is. She tells Kimi that, until about a year ago when she received a life-saving heart transplant, she'd spent her whole life confined to a sick room. Ever since the transplant, she's been overwhelmed by this feeling that there's someone she wants to see again, but she's come to the conclusion that this sensation must be something passed down from the heart's original owner, and she wants to honor the wishes of the person who gave her the chance to live a real life. I like to get through the basics before delving into places a series fell short, but I will say that, rather unfortunately for a detective show, the logic holding these cases together is not this anime's strong point. So I'll spare you the sketchy details of how they deduce this, but Kimi and Nagisa eventually realize that it was Siesta who donated the heart for Nagisa's transplant. Kimi was the person Nagisa had wanted to reunite with all along, and furthermore, she decides to take up the mantle of legendary detective and continue working alongside him, though this proves to be a very different kind of partnership than the one he had with Siesta. Nagisa Natsunagi is just all around a fantastic character. I love everything about how she fits into this story. She's definitely not the detective Siesta used to be, but that's mostly a good thing. On one hand, her lack of experience gives Kimi a chance to shine, show off all he learned from Siesta during their 3 years together. He's still the sidekick, but he's also the mentor now. But from another perspective, Nagisa has strengths Siesta didn't. She's a very emotional person, liable to get so attached to their clients and invested in their take on the situation that it clouds her ability to be logical. While Siesta would have seen that as a major shortcoming, this is a partnership. Nagisa has Kimi to be suspicious for her, and the ability to connect with their clients the way Nagisa does is a strength in its own right. I loved the way she contrasts Siesta. It's never really about one being better than the other. They just have different ways of doing things. It's the passion they both have for this job that really matters. But she was also part of a bigger theme. By far, the most moving thing about this series were the present-day character stories, and how they all kind of mirror each other and allow them to connect with each other. Tale after tale of people learning to start living again after some sort of trauma. I have to admit, there's a part of me that wishes the focus had stayed on this simpler track. In many ways, The Detective Is Already Dead is a tale of extremes. Not just because it likes to go from being a fairly simple story, grounded in reality, to suddenly revealing something totally nonsensical and magical, but also because it does some things very well and others almost laughably badly. I mentioned that the conclusions to the cases tended to be held together by, like, the barest traces of logic. That tended to make the plot-focused segments pretty weak. But the characters were all pretty amazing, our core group anyway. I love their relationships and dynamics. The emotional moments are usually pretty spot on. I think this series could have been really successful, focusing primarily on this more realistic, recovering from grief storyline, keeping all the craziness with Spess to a minimum. But about halfway through, they do drag you back for about 5 or 6 episodes to show you the cases leading up to Siesta's death, which I expected, but I figured that flashback would be maybe 1 full episode, not the huge chunk of the series it ended up being. No major spoilers on anything that really matters anyway. We do meet Spess's leader in like the second to last episode, and he does suddenly throw a "we were aliens all along" twist at you, but yeah, no worries for spoilers about things that actually mattered. I loved Kimi and Siesta's partnership. Getting to see them 3 years in, as an established couple for all intents and purposes, was great, but it wasn't all that long before I found myself getting impatient to get back to the present-day story. Mostly because it felt like this show was telling 2 distinctly different tales, and I wanted them to have enough time to do at least one of them well. It all works out in the end, because they reveal some major things about Nagisa, tying her into the main plot, but it took a minute for that twist to grow on me, mostly because she already had such a strong storyline and identity in the story, and at no point did they succeed in making me care about this androids, aliens taking over the world bullshit. I know I've said it a million times, I usually like a higher stakes plot, but this one just wasn't it. The villain storylines were somewhere between sloppy, lazy, and generic. I really do think you could have cut them out completely, tweaked a few things, and still had a really solid, emotional story. That said, I do think it wraps up really well. That final twist did grow on me. That said, from what I can tell, it does look like this series was confirmed for a season 2, and I'm honestly not sure that's necessary. Obviously, there are still story threads left unfinished. Spess is still going strong, and our heroes have vowed to take it down, and of course I will watch it if season 2 ever gets off the ground, but it has been 3 years now, and there doesn't seem to be much in the way of news, which isn't promising. Frankly, in this world we're living in where most anime adaptations are incomplete, this one left off in a pretty good place. I could leave this one satisfied if this was all we got. It was the character stories that really shined, and I did get a sense of closure from the way this season wrapped up. There was one plot point I might like to see explored. Kimi grew up in foster care, and they really make a point to communicate in the first episode that his parents are missing, not dead, so I definitely expected that to come back in some way. All I can say is they're really gonna need to fine-tune this main plot if this series does continue. Thank you for watching.